Welcome back, everybody. Chapter 9, Digestive System and Nutrition. We're really just focusing on the digestive system. And again, I've used some figures where I can to introduce some more elaborate material, and then there'll be some more detailed slides that you can pause and take a look at and read more slowly if you'd like. So let's get started. All right, what's going on in digestion? Well, along our gastrointestinal tract, what we're trying to do is take the food that we're eating and breaking it down or hydrolyzing it into its basic subunits. So remember our macromolecules: proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids. We want to break that down into the basic subunits. We're also going to release other nutrients. So we have minerals, for example, we have vitamins, we have salts, and of course lots of water. And so essentially we are extracting out all that good stuff from the food that we eat, and then we're going to transport that to the cells. So the cells of our body need these nutrients to function, and so our digestive system is going to make that possible by using the cardiovascular system. All right, so let's just take a look. Digestion really starts in your mouth. Well, it really starts before you even start eating. You know, like you dished up that really ooey gooey macaroni and cheese. Maybe you've got some baked beans or some chili. Maybe you make chili mac. Maybe you got a hamburger with it, and you're starting to smell it and look at it. And essentially when you do that, you are going to start making hormones. You are also going to be making enzymes that are all ready to do that digestion. Okay? So even though we don't talk about smell and taste as far as the functions of the GI tract, it's so important to get us ready, or get our digestive tract ready for the things that it needs to do. So you take a bite of food, and essentially you have your teeth. Your teeth are going to be involved in crushing and chewing and essentially making the bigger pieces of food into smaller pieces of food. Why would we want to do that? I'll tell you why. Because in our mouth we have saliva, and along in our cheeks and underneath our tongue we have salivary glands. And these salivary glands are releasing enzymes with the saliva into our mouth. So as you're chewing, you're essentially coating the food that you're eating, you're chewing and breaking it down into smaller pieces. The saliva is going to start acting on that food. And it's the salivary amylase, and that's the only one I'm going to mention in this class. But essentially that's the big one that's being made by your salivary glands, is the salivary amylase. And it is an enzyme that's going to break down complex carbohydrates into maltose. So it breaks it down into a disaccharide. So also in your mouth, you have your tongue. So your tongue is helping move that food around and essentially mechanically helping digestion. The teeth mechanically help digestion. And then, of course, the salivary amylase is going to do chemical digestion. So when you feel like you're done chewing that food, then you get this, urge to swallow. And when you swallow, the back of your throat, that pharynx, that essentially that junction between your nasal cavities passing down the back of your throat and your tongue then in the back of your mouth meeting, that's where we're going to have this muscle. And this muscle is literally, when you contract it or when you swallow, it pushes food down into the esophagus. Now, while there are skeletal muscles involved with chewing, there's smooth muscle involved with peristalsis of the digestive tract. So peristalsis is this rhythmic contractions of smooth muscles that essentially is going to move materials along. Now when you eat, that esophagus is going to begin this peristalsis, and it's going to move that food. At this point in time, we're going to call it a bolus, but it's essentially moving it down the esophagus. And it goes down, 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 down. You wouldn't normally fill your esophagus, but if you've ever swallowed something and you really didn't chew it very well, I'm thinking like a corn chip, then you might feel it going all the way down. Pills, so if you take some vitamins or something like that and they get stuck kind of in here, then you might need extra water or food to help push down those pills because they're kind of stuck in the esophagus. So then you might actually be aware of your esophagus. Okay, so then we see that the esophagus is going to literally puncture the diaphragm, and it is going to take the food into the stomach. Okay, The stomach is a sac-like structure on the kind of on the left-hand side of your abdomen, And essentially, this peristalsis is going to occur, and it's going to mix the stomach acids with that bolus. So it's going to be mixing this, what was once food, but now it's kind of partially digested. It's going to mix it with enzymes that are going to break down the begin digestion of proteins. Okay, so these are called proteases. So begin to digest the proteins, and essentially mixing that food with digestive juices. You probably already know that in the stomach, the pH of the stomach is on the lower side. Why is that the case? Well, it's going to help kill anything that you might be consuming on your food. Your food was once alive. It is an organic material, so we are ingesting some amounts of microorganisms on the food that we're eating, so this acid is going to help protect us. Okay, you don't have to think about the stomach. There's the smooth muscle, the small intestine, comes in three kinds, and essentially it's causing the rhythmic contraction of the stomach. The rhythmic contractions is mechanical digestion. The use of proteases and peptidases to digest protein, that's going to be our chemical digestion. All right, so then that food is going to very slowly move from the stomach into the small intestine. And at this point, when it was in the stomach, it was getting all mixed up. When it's heading out, we call it chyme. So chyme now is like just drizzling slowly into the small intestine. And guess what? We have more digestive enzymes. So anything that's an enzyme is going to be aiding in chemical digestion. Of course, the smooth muscle peristalsis is going to be mechanical digestion. But basically, what we're going to do is we're going to finish the digestion of the maltose, we're going to finish the digestion of the peptides, and then we are going to begin and finish the digestion of our lipids. Now, we are also breaking down nucleic acids. It's just not something that most of your books are really focusing on, so I'm not going to focus on that. But yes, in fact, that's happening too. All right, so along the small intestine then, we are going to be finishing that digestion and absorbing the products that we talked about in the previous slides, okay? So once we get down to the end of, once we get down to the duodenum, essentially now this food is going to move from the small intestine to the large intestine. We have here the appendix that you know so much about. And then we see that we are going to move this material, essentially the leftovers or the wastes from the digestion of our food, we're going to move it through the ascending, the transverse, the descending, and the sigmoid colon. And all along that tract, we are going to be absorbing water. What we're trying to do is get all the stuff out of what will be feces, and water is a big part of that. We also know that we have bacteria in our colon that's going to be synthesizing vitamin K, which is actually important to blood clotting. So we are going to be absorbing some vitamins in our large intestine as well. When we get down to the sigmoid colon, essentially what we're going to do is move essentially what we're going to call feces at this point. That feces is going to be stored in the rectum until we have a massive peristaltic event where there's a bulk movement of material from our rectum. We get the urge to go to defecate, and essentially that rectum is going to be contracting, and then we are going to release those materials through our anus. There are, some accessory organs that's worth mentioning. Accessory organs are not directly on the tract, but they are heavily involved in digestion. So the salivary glands, not really on the tract, they're like releasing enzymes into the mouth. The mouth is part of the digestive tract. The liver is super important to making bile. Bile is going to help us emulsify fat or get the fat to freely suspend in the liquid in the small intestine. And then we have an enzyme called lipase that digests the fat. The liver is also going to be important to storing nutrients, and it's just going to do a whole lot of stuff. Yeah, okay. Gallbladder, so when our liver is making that bile we need for emulsification of fat, it's going to be stored in the gallbladder. And then the gallbladder is literally going to drip that bile into the small intestine. We also have here the pancreas. So the pancreas is important because it's making pancreatic juice. And in that juice, we have enzymes, a number of enzymes. Pancreatic amylase, for example, pancreatic lipase, both which are going to chemically digest the food. So then, essentially then, that pancreas is also going to be important to regulating blood sugar by the production of hormones like insulin and glucagon, which we'll come back to in the endocrine system. Okay, ingestion is intake of the food via the mouth. Digestion is when we chemically or mechanically break it down. So we have the chemical digestion and mechanical digestion, which I've highlighted throughout our previous slide. Digestive processes involve movement of the food, so mouth, pharynx, moving it along the organs, absorption of the byproducts. So the major absorption is the small intestine. There are a few things that are absorbed across the stomach, but you're really thinking about the small intestine. And then we have to eliminate any products of digestion that we could not break down. So one of those big things is cellulose. There's also collagen, pieces of tendons and so on from meat that we eat. We just cannot break it down. So it's going to be released through our feces. Okay, the mouth. I know we talked ad nauseum about digestion in the mouth, but certainly the teeth, the hard palate, the tongue, all super important. Of course, our mandible, super important. Masseter, super important to chewing our food. Process of swallowing. So we talked about the pharynx pushing down, moving the bolus down, peristalsis, moving that food down. We will continue in part 2 for chapter 9.